Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to my list of most anticipated kits as of May 2021. As my friend Chris Becker likes to assert all the time, modeling isn't so much a single hobby as it is a collection of multiple hobbies, kind of all moving in the same-ish direction. And most of the videos on this channel are focused on the building and the painting hobbies of modeling. It's all about building the kits, painting the kits, weathering the kits. Even when I do rant videos, it's about painting the kits, weathering the kits, and sort of the culture around those things. But this time, I'm going to switch gears and go over to the other hobby, which is acquiring kits. And, you can definitely think of those as separate hobbies that occasionally intersect, right? I mean, I just sold off a pretty good portion of my stash, a few weeks ago. It was definitely fun buying those kits, but you kind of come over time to realize that that one's maybe lost its luster, I've lost interest in this certain subject, a better kit of this thing has come along, and so on. And so the stash constantly evolves and shrinks and grows and shrinks and grows. And as part of the acquisition side of the hobby, there are kind of two main branches that it tends to take. There's the kits I wish somebody would make, and then there's the kits that are coming out in the nearest future that I want. And they're two separate things. Like, yes, I want Tamiya to make a 1/32 scale P47. Yes, I want Bandai to make larger Star Wars kits, that sort of a thing. That's not the same as this company here has announced this subject and it's coming out sometime in the next 10 months. They're two separate things. So in this video, I thought it'd be fun to look ahead a few months and list out the kits that have already been announced, that are on their way, that I'm anticipating the most. Now, this is May 2021, so this list, by next week, by next month, certainly by next year, could completely change. But this is a snapshot in time, late May 2021, things that have been announced by manufacturers that are in development that we've seen, if nothing else, CAD renderings of, something like that, announcements in a catalog somewhere, even sprue shots, box art, and whatnot. Things that are on their way right now. So, let's get into it. First up, because how could it not be, is Tamiya's new 1/48 scale F4B Phantom, which should be out within the next few weeks. Now, when it was announced, I know that a lot of people were like, cool, a new Tamiya kit, an F4B, and you get the typical moaning of, haven't they kitted enough Phantoms, blah, 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 things like that. And honestly, having been dipping my toes into the Phantom pool multiple times since Academy kind of shook things up a few years ago with their own F4B, no, there are not enough Phantoms. Before Academy decided to release that F4B a few years ago, the most recent Phantoms in 1/48 scale had been coming out from Hasegawa, and they were being boxed in the 80s and the early 90s. And they are definitely dated kits nowadays. And while they're not bad, they're certainly also not great. They pose their problems. Some of them combine like newer parts with older parts with raised panel lines. Some of the detail is just really lacking, and overall, a better job could be done. Academy attempted to do that. I am personally not at all a fan of the Academy kits. I have tried building 3 of them now. I actually got one of them some distance into paint, and just something about it just rubbed me the wrong way. The way it goes together, you have to install the gear struts as you build the gear bay. I don't know, something about it just didn't sit right with me, and by the time I got to painting, I had just kind of lost interest. I've tried my hand at a Hasegawa one as well, and kind of hit the same thing, where it's like you're dealing with a lot of compromises for a kit that was originally boxed, not even tooled, but just boxed in like 1991. And the pylons are the pylons are ancient. The fit of different things is not great. You're making sacrifices on the vertical or on the dorsal spine, where you have all those little circular hatches that are bisected by the joint of the fuselage. You have to rescribe them. It's a lot. And so I was particularly excited when Zukimura came out with their F4s, and they're certainly good, but they skipped the B, and they also have that weird kind of rear haunch shape thing that drives a lot of people crazy. Personally, I don't really see it. But they have their own little quirks here and there too. I mean, they're great kits, but I don't think they're perfect by any means. And honestly, when Tamiya wades into town, I perk up and listen, because their 1/48 kits over the time that I've been back into the hobby have been nothing short of masterful. I mean, they were a bit absent when I first came back, but I think the IL-2 might have been the first one they dropped, and holy shit, that's a stunner of a kit. And since then, it's been, what, F14, 109, KI-61, the P38, which is just ungodly good. I mean, I think it might be the best kit I've ever built in terms of just how well it goes together. And so, if they're taking on a Phantom, a subject that is notoriously tricky in certain areas to get right, bring it on. I'm all for it. I cannot wait to get that kit onto my bench. Even if the F4B isn't my favorite variant, Tamiya's engineering and fit is definitely my favorite in the modeling world, and so I will suck it up and build a B just to experience that. Next up, there's Zukimura's continuing adventure into the later, longer nose F4s, particularly the F4G Wild Weasel. Now, I've built their F4D, and I quite enjoyed it, to the point that when they announced they were going to be doing the longer nose, you know, the E, F, G, etc., I was jazzed, because those have just been ignored since Hasegawa was boxing them back again in the early 90s. And everybody would kind of like sneak up to that point. You know, Academy would do like the B and the C and the D and the J and the N, and then they would just stop. And so when Zukimura started dropping like the F4S, and you know, you have the right wings to do a late E at that point, like there were certain things that started coming together and generating excitement. And then they went and confirmed they were going to be doing long nose, late variants of the Phantom, which I don't really think Tamiya with their new F4B is ever going to get to. They will probably do the standard B, C, D, or CD combo. They will probably do a J. They'll certainly do a J. What am I talking about? Beyond that, they might do an early E so they can push a little bit further and get a Japanese EJ Kai variant. But I don't see them making an F or making, you know, an F4G Wild Weasel or anything like that, which takes us back to Zukimura. So I am definitely jazzed, because the F4G is my favorite of the Phantom variants. I am a Desert Storm dork. You know, I was 11 when that was blasting all over CNN, and people were actually collecting trading cards about a war, which when you look back is really kind of creepy. But, you know, I had the whole set. The F4G is something that kind of like stuck in my mind at the time. That and the RF4C are my two favorite variants of the Phantom. I love Phantoms in the Hill scheme. And so the fact that a new tool one is coming, I'm very excited for that. Now, Zukimura is moving kind of slow with these things. They just released the E earlier in the year and the EJ for the Japanese variant. So they're slowly coming out. I don't know when the G will actually make its appearance, but the second it does, everything else that I have on the bench is getting cleared off to work on that, because I've been waiting. You know, I've got harm missiles sitting around ready to go on it. I've got markings for it sitting around waiting to go on it. I just need the kit at this point. Okay, let's step away from Phantoms. Next up is the Modelsvit 148 scale F82 Twin Mustang. Now, the Twin Mustang is very far from my favorite aircraft. I think it is ungainly, ugly, and a bit ridiculous looking. But that also really makes me want to build a kit of it, right? Because ungainly, interesting looking things are kind of my jam. And you know, the possibility of a new tool of that kit, particularly when they did a fairly solid job with the P51H from the builds I've seen. It looks like it goes together well, nicely detailed. You know, probably outside of the Edward P51s, it's probably one of the better ones on the market. So the fact that that is going to basically just double up and add a few new parts to make an F82, cool, I'm on board, I'm there for it. It's also interesting because the F82 has long been one of the sores of the 148th scale model selection ecosystem, because I think it's Modelcraft made one that just has a reputation as being an absolute dog of a kit. You know, it's the kind of one where even the basic modeling skills crowd will get out there and say that one is a nightmare. And man, if they're saying it's a nightmare, it's got to be bad. So the dangling of a new tool, F82, definitely has piqued my interest. Next up, it's time to go look at some ICM kits. So first of all, the B26. When ICM announced the B26, I got all excited, and then I realized they were talking about the Douglas B26, not the Martin B26. And a little bit deflating, because the Martin B26 Marauder is one of my favorite bombers from World War II. I feel like it's very underappreciated and very underrepresented in the modeling hobby in general. And a new tool, one of those, would have been awesome. B26, a bit less so. I'm not quite as into it, especially the variants that they've released so far. For me, it's the later variants of that kit, and then the possibility of things like fire bombers and whatnot that really make it interesting. Well, now that they've released the B and the C and the World War II variants and all that kind of thing, they're finally getting around to the later variants. So the one that most people are all excited about is the B-26K Counter Invader, which is the one with like the tip tanks, the one that you see done up in SEA camo. And yeah, I guess that one, I mean, it's cool looking. I'm kind of interested in it. The one that I am interested in, though, is the DB-26 with the Q2 Firebee drones slung under the wings. The DB-26 can also be known as the JD-1 for like the navalized version. Basically, it's the one I wanted to do with the original ICM kit, and I dawdled on it because of waiting for different parts and things like that, and like drones to become available. And then ICM goes and puts it all in a box, and it's like, here you go. But I like the JD1/DB26 because it's got a really cool, like, you know, sea blue scheme with bright high visibility patches on it, with these super colorful big ass Firebee drones slung under the wings. It's a very different look, and it's a very interesting aircraft in general. The next ICM kit that I'm looking forward to is the 1/32nd scale AH-1G Cobra, because large scale helicopters, awesome. It's one of those things that helicopters in general just feel ignored in this hobby to a large extent. You know, whether we're talking something as seminal as the first helicopter gunship like an AH-1, or even there is no large-scale Apache except for a very old Revell kit, as far as I know. And, you know, we just got like Academy's 135th scale AH-1Z, which is awesome to see. But there's not that much selection, especially selection plus quality, in larger scale helicopter kits. I mean, even in the 148 scale, you're missing a lot of decent ones. And when you can find a 148 scale of a certain helicopter, it's invariably something like Italeri, and it's like, great. That's not what I'm asking for here. So it's cool to see ICM diving in and giving us a 1/32nd scale Cobra. I mean, that's going to be an awesome kit to play with for sure. And the fact that they're packing figures with it, and the figures look great. And it's a two-bladed helicopter, because the big problem with large-scale helicopters isn't the shape of the actual fuselage itself, it's the rotor span. When you add 4 rotors, and those rotors are, you know, as wide and long as the kit, and they stick out beyond the kit, and things, it makes storing them and displaying them very difficult. Like, where do you put a 1/35th scale Hind with a rotor span of something like 30 plus inches? Like, where does that go? You know, even Kitty Hawk with their Seahawk kits or their Blackhawk kits, it's the same thing. Massive rotors, where do they go? And most people don't really have display space for something that big in those 2 dimensions, right? But a 2-bladed helicopter like the Cobra, easy, no problem. So one aircraft that I think has been done really dirty, particularly in 1/32nd scale, is the P-40, and particularly the P-40B, which is, when you think about it, really strange, because it is certainly one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II, particularly the first couple years. You know, I would say it's the P-40, the Zero, Spitfire Mark I, and the Bf-109E. Like, those are the big 4 aircraft I would put into, you know, what did the war look like in 1939 to early 1942. Like, that's them right there. And your only option for a 1/32nd scale P-40B, you know, if you want to do the Flying Tigers, or if you want to do a Pearl Harbor one, your only option is the Trumpeter kit, which has problems and has a too shallow cockpit floor. And if they were taking parts from that kit to build the P-40F that I built, they have problems beyond that as well. You know, it's decent but not great. Accuracy is an issue, and it is very far from what I think anybody would call a definitive take on the P-40B in 1/32nd scale. So it is awesome to see Great Wall Hobby, of all companies, come out of nowhere and announce that they are doing a 1/32nd scale P-40B. You know, they've been kind of stomping all over flankerland, starting with the SU-35 and working their way back into the SU-27s. And having built their SU-35 all the way through to the point where the decals kind of threw everything off the rails, it's a formidable kit. It is probably the closest I have seen another company come, outside of maybe the Edward Mustang, to matching or topping Tamiya in terms of engineering and fit. It is that good. And so if they can bring that same level of game to a 1/32nd scale P-40, they're going to just be rolling in it with that kit. I think that kit will be very popular unless they somehow completely screw it up. So basically it's theirs to lose. They've got a good reputation, a great subject that has just not been covered. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well. So next up is newcomer Beacon models with their 1/144 scale Spitfire Mark I and BF 109E. And I'm including two because a lot of times 1/144 scale kits give you two kits, so I can do that. I think they're coming in like the same box even. So I know that I typically stick to 1/48 and 1/32 scale for aircraft kits. But if I want something smaller, if I want like a palette cleansing build, I've been known to dip down to 1/144 scale. Why do I skip over 1/72? Well, I feel like 1/72 is small enough to be annoying and big enough to be annoying. So it's big enough that the compromises made in scale look way off and kind of ruin it. But it's small enough that it's really fiddly and difficult to work with in places. 1/144 takes it to the point where it's almost comical. Like, the tininess is part of the appeal of 1/144 scale. And so I'm okay with it being tiny. I'm okay with it being clunky in areas because there are limits to injection molding technology. And it makes for essentially a different experience of modeling compared to like a 1/48 scale kit. And so I like that Beacon Models is coming in dedicated to this like weird small scale. And I like that they're taking it not only in the realm of modeling, but also in the realm of gaming. So they're packaging it so that you can basically buy a bunch of these things and make like squadrons of Spitfires and squadrons of 109s. And from what I understand, they're also going to be covering essentially all the aircraft that took part in the Battle of Britain for wargaming purposes, which is pretty cool. I mean, with 3 kids, I don't really have the time or space to do wargaming, but I like the fact that this other audience is being catered to. And given the popularity of gaming, from what I've seen in like Kickstarter and Patreon projects, that's probably a smart move. It'll probably get them, a whole separate or somewhat disconnected audience coming in to buy these things for that purpose, and then you'll get modelers coming from the other side. So that's cool to see. Next up is the Revell 1/72 scale Razor Crest from The Mandalorian. Now this one isn't so much anticipating the kit as it is anticipating learning more about the kit and seeing what it turns out to be. Because let's face it, Revell with the Star Wars license so far has been a complete and total mess. I mean, when The Force Awakens came out, they came out with weird scaled, like 1/67th scale or whatever, TIE fighters, and they had a random 1/29th scale X-Wing that was big but very crude. When Solo came around, they brought out a couple kits that were just like toy-like, just not great. But since then, Revell USA collapsed. All of its shit got bought by Revell Germany, and so it's basically a different company at this point. And this, I think, is going to be the first time that we really see what that different company is going to do with the Star Wars license and what kind of kit they're going to give us. And the fact that they're going with 1/72 for the Razor Crest is really promising because, while Bandai's over here making a Razor Crest that's going to be that big, Revell's doing it 1/72 scale, which should be around a little over a foot long if I'm doing my math correctly. So, a sizable kit. And if they can pull off any decent level of detail and fit, it'll be pretty popular, I'm assuming. And so that's one where I'm just kind of waiting to see what's behind the announcement, what's behind the subject. Like, what's the engineering like? What's the part count like? Are they going to maybe go crazy and do like a limited edition with lighting? Like, who knows at this point? And yes, it is totally possible at this point to 3D print your own Razor Crest. However, there are 2 problems with that. First of all, 3D printing something that you're then going to paint silver or, bare metal, that's a lot of layer lines to fight through. Having experienced that on the Cobb Vanth Speeder, like, there's a lot of sanding involved. And there's also the fact that you're dealing with curved cockpit glass. And printing curved glass in 3D printing resin, you're asking for layer lines and clunkiness, and again a lot more sanding and polishing and cleaning up to get it where it needs to be. And so I think it's just one of those subjects that really lends itself better to injection molded plastic. And I'm hopeful that Revell realizes what they've got on their hands and that they understand the hunger out there for somewhat larger, somewhat more substantial Star Wars kits, and maybe this is the one that proves to them, hey, there's a market for this, make more things. But we shall see. Next up, Roden is finally releasing a 1/32nd scale SPAD 13. Now, this is the subject that I kept wishing Wingnut Wings would get around to at some point, but they've gone and collapsed after making countless variants of very esoteric German fighters that nobody except for complete World War I dorks had ever heard of. I can't help but wonder if they'd made the Camel and the DR-1 earlier, and if they'd done things like the SPAD 13, it's like, this is the plane that Eddie Rickenbacker flew. That will attract a lot of people, a lot more people probably than, the third Falls 3 or whatever the hell it was that's being made. So, yeah, the SPAD 13 is my favorite World War I aircraft, and it's something I've been wanting a good kit of for a while, because there is the ancient Hobbycraft one out there that's very crude. And while Roden isn't my favorite company by a long shot, the prospect of a SPAD 13 that is at least beyond decent has me hopeful. Now, I think this might actually already be released, but I haven't seen reviews of it or sprue shots or anything like that anywhere yet. I just know that its release is imminent. So I'm not really in the market for World War I aircraft right now, but that will be an exception. Now, the last two kits I'm going to talk about haven't actually been announced yet, so they're technically in violation of this whole anticipated kits filter that I'm using for this video, but I consider them so inevitable that it's literally a matter of time, and I'm going to talk about them anyway. First up is a Tamiya P38J/L Lightning. The P38FG is a phenomenal kit. I am in paint with it right now. I have loved it. I think it is probably the best 1/48 scale kit I've ever put together. I mean, the engineering is flawless. It's just mind-boggling how well it goes together. And as you build it, you see all the places where they've left space to do additional variants. Like the P38L, for example, moved the landing lights from the underside of the wings to the leading edge of the wings. And the Tamiya P38 has separate parts for the leading edge of the wings. And before you put them on, there is actually a cutout in there where a leading edge landing light would fit. So I have to imagine they're thinking about things like a P38L. And considering that the J is kind of the iconic one, and the L is the one that was more produced by a long shot than any other variant, makes me think that they're going to do a double up, kind of like what they did with the F and the G, where we will get a J and an L, and we will get to go bare metal crazy with all the late war Pacific Lightnings that were flying around shooting things and blowing stuff up. And I will absolutely be buying at least one, probably several more than one, once that thing is announced and released. And finally, I think armor needs a bit of representation in this list, so I'm going to go with a 1/35th scale new tool Challenger 1. Now, I have no idea what company is going to be the first one to get to this thing, but if the past couple years of new kits are any indication, it will probably be 2 or 3 companies at the same time. I think Ryfield Models is certainly circling. They just released a couple of Challenger 2 kits, finally giving us a good alternative to the ancient trumpeter kits, unless you want to build like the desertized one that Tamiya did, which I'm not a big fan of all the deserted up, boxed up, fenced up, modern armor stuff. I much prefer the cleaner look of like the original Challenger 2. So Ryfield's given us that. Ming could be another contender. Tacom, because they just did a whole Chieftain line, so it would make sense for them to step up and do a Challenger line as well. So I think somewhere in that orbit, somebody is going to release a Challenger 1 new tool within the next 2 or 3 years probably. And I will be waiting for it, because the Challenger 1, kind of like going back to the F4G Wild Weasel, the Challenger 1 is my favorite modern tank. I just like the way it looks. The old Tamiya kit is okay, but it's very old. It's showing its age for sure compared to modern toolings. And I would love to see something with more detail and with maybe a better representation of that cargo basket on the turret than here's a frame and here's some fucking netting, glue it together. That could be photo etch, that could be really well done injection molded plastic, who knows. But that is a tank that I very much want to see make its way into the world, and I feel like over the past several years, all the other tanks that would fit into that spectrum, like the M60A1 with the reactive armor that the Marines used in Desert Storm, we've got that out on the market now. We've got M551 Sheridans rolling around. We've got, Trumpeter released an M270 MLRS a couple years back that is phenomenal. So I feel like a lot of my hit list of things that I want to see, Leopard 1s, we've got several of those. They're coming out, and like the last holdout of that set of sort of '80s era Cold War armor is the Challenger 1. And again, to me, it's only a matter of time. So those are the kits that I'm anticipating the most, and I'm looking really forward to some of them starting to drop here over the next few months, extending out through the next year, 2 years, who knows. Modeling release calendars are always screwy, but a lot of good stuff coming out. We're definitely in a golden age of new kits and new subjects being covered that have never really been covered properly before, and I, for one, am looking quite forward to it. Which kits are you anticipating? Sound off in the comments, let me know. I'm sure that there are some on the way that I have just completely overlooked. Some that I chose not to include, not because I'm not looking forward to them, just because the list would get really long. So things like, the new Revell Blackbird would kind of fit in the Razor Crest category of, I might be anticipating it. It depends what the kit actually turns out to be. But that could be a really cool thing if they get it right. So, yeah, sound off in the comments. Let me know what kits you're anticipating, and buckle up for the next few months of modeling, because there's going to be some fun stuff coming down the pipe. Later.